Hi, guys and ladies. Welcome back to the podcast. My name is Disama Matieti. We are on episode number 11, and today we're going to be talking about understanding the different type of data structures, which is quite important for people that are beginning in analysis, just as a beginner's guide. Understanding data analysis will totally blow you away, and I do assure you that at the end of this podcast, there will be one or two things that you would not have known about data structures. In order to do that, stay tuned and we will continue just after our theme song. It's quite amazing how, if we learn how computers store data, we get to become better at interacting with computers. I say this because previously I used to think that hard drives or HDDs are the only place where data gets stored. But it was only later on when I actually did my honors that I understood that data gets stored in different forms, and knowing how your data gets stored, it actually makes it easier for you to understand your analysis. And this is why I'm thinking that in 2023, it is quite important. Knowing data structures should be one of the most important things that we could do as analysts. And hence why I'm starting this conversation at the beginning of our podcast. So there are different ways of data structure, 5 different types that I will elaborate a little bit later, just to give you a list. The first ones are variables, second ones are data tables. Tables are quite um, familiar. Everybody else is talking about tables, tables, tables. The third one is something called a list. As the name goes, it's just a list. And the fourth one is what we call the key value pairs, something quite interesting. And the last one, which is my favorite, is the hash tables. So the hash tables, I never understood until later on in computer forensics that I really started to understand hash tables. It's something when you're looking at the hash table, you don't even know what you are reading there, but it is important for you to have the hash table. So I know this sounds a little bit goofy, but like I said, at the end of this episode, I assure you that you'll be blown away by what I've prepared you here. And let me not just waste time. Let's dive right straight into it. So, first question is, what is a variable? So, if we're starting, a variable is like, think of it as the building block for data manipulation. um, I call them building blocks because they represent like a storage location that holds value for data. Think of it this way. I don't know if you still remember the Omo game, the telephone game, where you would say one thing to one person and to another and to another and to another. At the end of the cycle, we start to recall what did the other person say. So in order for you to pass data around, you declare something when you start programming something called a variable, and then you assign data into it. You can assign data immediately as it starts with the first speaker to say, here's the telephone game. The word is silence. Or you can declare the variable later into your code. Maybe when it gets to speaker number 7, only then do they say, actually, the keyword is silence. But it's all up to you. A variable doesn't store data onto the hard drive, but it just passes data throughout as you are using your program or your own coding that you are working in. Variables are quite important, especially when you need data in the flash. So you can actually come around, declare certain variables to make sure that a user can have a unified experience throughout the whole experience. The nicest, easiest way to understand this one is when you have a website with logging in details, you would put login details or username as a variable, so that every time when you refresh to say what did you last buy, you can always use variable. You always go back to that variable so that you can say, oh, hang on a second, our user never bought kitchenware. They always bought shoes. So the last buy will be something that has to do with shoes. So that's what variables are there for. Hence why I call them the building blocks, to say before you start to commit data or save it permanently, you can start by putting it as variables. And if you know how to manipulate and use variables, I think you'll be in a good position with your analysis. Second one that is quite more important is data table. So question that we might be asking ourselves is, why are data tables common? So data tables are also known as data sets. You'll hear a lot of people talking about data sets, and they are structured way to store data or organize data. So the same way as you hear me talking about table structured, you can just hear that we're no longer talking about a flash drive or a RAM or temporary storage. We're now talking to permanent storage, which is hard drives or solid states or cloud, whatever the case is. Now you're dealing with permanent storage. That's where tables are coming in handy. It consists of rows and columns when you're talking about a table, because there's a column and there are rows into it, and it's more like if you are new into tables, it's more like opening up when you open up an Excel spreadsheet. What you're seeing there, it's actually more like how data gets stored in a table. You would have your columns on the top and you have your rows just on the bottom, going all the way to infinite amount of rows and infinite amount of columns. The only thing that can stop you in tables is, your space. If you run out of space, then that's the only thing else that stops you. I'm not going to go into how does data get stored in tables and how does it exponentialize, how, adding one column could actually make whatever double. I'm not even going to go into that side, but this is quite important, and they're quite well-known tables. The data tables provide a tabular format that allows for efficient data manipulation, filtering, sorting, and analysis. Like I said, if you have opened up Excel workbooks before, you would understand what I'm talking about. The other popular one is Google Sheets. If you open up Google Sheet, you would understand what it looks like. And more or less, if you understand that, you would understand how data gets stored into SQL. It's exactly like a Google Sheet or an Excel workbook, but now stored not just a million rows, but stored like many millions of rows. All depends on how much space do you have to query that data. Okay, the third one that we're going to be talking about is called list. So like the name suggests, is list. But now the question that we might be asking ourselves is, are lists synonymous with tables? The answer is no. Lists are not the same as tables. So a list is the same as when you do your shopping list. You just put one thing after another. You just do one list. A list, in so way we can call it an ordered collection of elements or items. Unlike data tables, lists are typically one dimensional, meaning that you don't have many columns. You just have one column and many rows or many entries going all the way down. For example, a list of names, or a list of mixed data types. So you can just have a list like that. This is like looking at only one table of your Excel workbook or your Google Sheet. You just take out all the other rows and then you're just left with one. Why would I choose to use a list instead of a table? Because it's quite common that you can think, if it looks like a table, why can't I just do a table but I just use one row? So it's because lists are flexible and allow for dynamic resizing. making them suitable for scenarios where the number of elements may change over time. This will be if you are going around and you're saying, we're going to be creating our forecasting and we're going to be looking for the following variables, or our forecasting versions is going to be Q0, it's going to be Q2, it's going to be Q3, and then you're going to have a 3-year plan, or the one that's called Q4. And then later on, you decide, you know what, I just want you guys to do two budgeting cycles. It's going to be Q0 and 3-year plan. And then you collapse the two. A list will help you instead of a table. You just collapse these two, and then now the two budgeting scenarios that will be available going forward will only be Q0 and 3-year planning, not everything. So that's how list becomes quite, um, you know, quite useful. Um, and when I first started in analysis, I often used lists to perform um, iterative operations and to store data sequentially, which is quite important. The fourth one that we're going to be looking at here is called arrays. So um, you might be asking yourself, what is an array? What is an array of data? So an array, like name suggests, is something that has to do with data being stored in some sequence somehow. So arrays are like lists, as they also store collection of elements or variables. So it is like a list. It's like a list. Remember, a list is one column going down. An array is like one row um, going to infinite columns. So if it's one column to infinite rows, it's a list. If it's one row going into infinite columns, it's called an array. However, arrays have a fixed size, um, unlike lists. Remember, lists have got unlimited rows going down, unlimited rows. The arrays has got limited. You just tell it to say, I want you to have 5 columns, and then you have 5 columns, and then you have one row. It goes to 5 columns, and then that's how you stop. And once an array is done, then you can create another instance where you're storing things into an array. Simple example, let's go back to our shopping list. An array that we might be getting, let's say for instance, we're getting 5 things. First thing would be a user person. Second thing, another thing could be another thing could be what did you last buy. Another variable could be what are you likely to buy next, and another variable could be probably how you like to be addressed or where do you stay. So if you have those 5 variables fixed, every time you log in, the computer or our software will populate those 5 variables, and then that, because it's not just one variable, it's 5 of them in one go, that is called an array. So you'll say one is called variable 1 will be username, variable 2 will be preference, variable 3, 4, 5, 6. So every time when you do your coding, you don't always have to call the contents, the array content or the variable content. You just need to give each variable its name, variable 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you'll say variable 1 dot name or variable 1 dot text is equals to whatever, and then pull whatever SQL data that you want to do. So it's a nice part about it. They have fixed, they are not dynamic in size, and they hold elements of the same data type. So you cannot mix and match data types. Arrays, when it's one data type, they hold that same data type. If you don't understand the data types, we did another podcast about data types. You can feel comfortable going back to episode number 9 just to learn a little bit about what are different data types. Okay. Arrays are widely used in data analysis and programming languages to store large volumes of similar data. I used to use arrays to store answers to questions which will be saved when we complete the questionnaire. Is another way of using it. To say you have the questionnaire, you store all those 17 questions that you're keeping out, more like a Google essay or a Google Sheet or Microsoft questionnaire. All those things are stored in an array. Only when you press submit, then it commits it into a table. But as soon as it's still staying there where it is, it's just an array, and then it gets committed later into the hard drive. So as it allows for data to be stored in temporary storage, which is the RAM or the flash drive, whatever you want to do, before it gets committed into the hard drive. Once you press commit or you press save, only then does it go into the hard drive. So arrays offer fast retrieval because they store on RAM and not on the hard drive, and are especially useful for numerical computations and algorithms. So nice part about if you want to look at arrays, if you have numbers that you want to store and you can just use them as you go along your program, best thing is to consider using an array so that every variable you don't have to query or send a SQL script to go get the stuff. That'll make the user experience slowly. You just go once as a person logs in, you go one, you pick up all of those things from a hard drive, maybe a table, you bring them back, you allocate them into all those variables, you allocate them into an array so that now every time when a user continues with the experience, you can already just pull everything else from the array itself. Okay. Now let's talk about the key value pairs. What are key value pairs? So key value pairs represent a data structure that associate a unique key with a corresponding value. A unique key with a corresponding value. This sounds like a lookup table. Yes, it is a lookup table. Keys act as identifiers and provide a way to access and retrieve specific values from the data structure. I've often used this in my analysis, which becomes magical at one point, because what you'll do is you would start by having a key that will make you connect to various tables. I know we haven't gone to an episode about joining and appending tables, but it's more like that. You would have a key. You say my key is my country ID number or social security number. You use your ID number as your key so that you can go to all the different tables or different arrays and use this key to unlock data that sits on the other side. So I think it's much easier to put it that way. It's easier for you to create a data dictionary using all those keys to say this key will unlock everything else, and this is how you put everything else in a form of a key. To understand this better, I think of an instance where you use your person's name as a key to retrieve other corresponding things. It could be your address or where you live, what car you drive, all of those things. Probably they're associated with a person's name. We do this naturally when we're thinking about somebody to say, oh, Thomas, the guy with the yellow shoes, oh, the guy with the tall guy who's got whatever the case is, who wears this watch. So you can think of it that way to say, as soon as you had the word key, which is the person's name, you could get all these other variables from different part of it. Could be from school. You say, oh, that guy that used to play rugby or used to play soccer. You just use the name, and then you found out all the other variables from different stores, from different data stores, data related categories. So it's more like that. The last one that I just like us to look at is called the hash tables. So a hash table, if you ask yourself, I'm assuming you're also like myself and you're asking yourself, what's the key value and that, what's the difference between key values and hash tables? Let's just say, for instance, hash tables are more like they pair up with key values, because what happens with the hash table is you use this table to retrieve other things from the other side. So instead of, remember the other one is the key value pairs, it's just the key, it's the value inside, it pairs with another one, it unlocks. Hash table is a table full of all these things that can unlock from the other side. Whether you're storing a list table or an array, you can use hash tables to unlock all of those things, to say, okay, hang on a second. I can, with a hash table, I can be able to store where the data is located in a hash table. So you have this hash code that you go into the hash code and it tells you where everything else is going in. Hash tables are also known as hash maps, are the type of data structure that provides efficient insertion, deletion, retrieval of key value pairs. So reason why this one is quite important, and understanding this was like magical for me, is because when you're thinking about a computer hard drive, I used to think that when you say format the hard drive, you're actually going in to delete the data in the hard drive. But in reality is you don't go to delete the hard drive in the data, or the data itself that sits in the hard drive. The data itself, it goes into ones and zeros. So if you think about little blocks like Excel blocks, if you put a 1 on one block, you put a 0, you put a 1, 1, 1, 0, 0. You take 8 of those, we put them together. How the ones and zeros are put together, it's a code for maybe a letter A. Another 100, what, it's another B. It's put the 8 or the 16 together creates this, whatever that creates that. The computer, by taking those binary ones and zeros, ones and zeros, it, based on how they are grouped together, it starts to create data, which is what we recognize as maybe numbers or pictures or pixels, depending on whatever software that you're using. But it all goes back to ones and zeros. So when you store this thing on a hard drive is just an empty ocean, has all of these ones and zeros that are next to each other. There's no space in between. There's no double space for whatever. Just ones and zeros, ones and zeros, ones and zeros. So what a hash table does is it takes, it's like a directory of where do I find hash and zeros that talks to my name, December Matsietsi. So it starts to say, from a hard drive, if you start at number 1, use ones and zeros position all the way to a billion position. So it says, hang on a second. The thing that talks about December, you can find them between 1001 and 1020. That location, you store it inside a hash table. So a hash table will tell you where to go into the hard drive to get the data, where to go into the hard drive to get the picture. So the amazing part is when you delete information, you don't actually delete the information inside the hard drive. You're deleting information inside the hash table. So if the hash table says December Matsiet is in number 1000 and whatever in the hard drive, all you're doing is you're deleting the reference into the hash table. And hard drives are designed in such a way that all the all the empty blocks, like I said, Excel workbook that are empty. If it's empty, it doesn't have 1 and 0 inside, it's just blank. The hash table will say those things, those spaces inside the hard drive are not allocated. So when you have a new file that comes in, we calculate to say, oh, this new file needs 17 spaces. I only got 16. Then you get an error message that says the hard drive is full. If it needs 17 spaces and we got 20, the file gets stored. But you can understand that over some time, you don't always find things that talks about my name next to each other. Maybe the first time that you use the hard drive, the first time, yes, they'll be next to each other. But when you use it the second time, depending where did you delete things, the hash table will go and say, oh, delete this position, delete that position, delete whatever that position. So hash tables are quite interesting. They're quite interesting because it's data that sometimes you can't interpret with the naked eye, but your computer might mean a lot of things. It might tell where to go, how to behave, things like that. And you can store quite a lot just with that hash code. Like I said, you find a software that hashes and gives you the code. You know, that whole thing that says your name, your surname, your food preference, your how much items of furniture you have in your house, anything else that you can think about that talks about yourself. Imagine you write it down in one word, all of it, doesn't matter, it's going to be 7 pages. And what we do is we use a software to hash it, to get a hash code for that. It's going to be a code that represents how you wrote those letters. You get a hash code and then you store that hash into this thing called a hash table. So a hash table creates all of that. That's what a hard drive does all the time. It just keeps on stirring a hash table. And if you always ask yourself, how is it that you bought 1 terabyte of data, but you're only getting 900 and something worth of space available? It's because of the hash table. The hash table also uses the same data, but it doesn't, it just wouldn't give you all of the data because we need to store where you're going to store the data somewhere. I know it makes no sense, but it already takes some of your data. But it's a fun thing to know that when people are frustrated, so, oh, I've lost my pictures, oh, I've lost my what, you can just easily retrieve them. You wouldn't have the same naming that was stored because the name, the likes, the whatever is stored inside the hash. Remember, you create a hash, all your whole life story, which is a book. We can store it inside a small little code called a hash. We hash it, becomes a small code, we store that code. The code itself needs uncoding. So because we can't uncode, we might not be able to know what was the title or what was the color of the shoe that you wanted. But we will be able to bring back the data to say, here's the shoes, here's the pictures that you took, here's the Excel workbook that you worked on. But don't ask me to say, where's the end of the paragraph? Where's the beginning of the paragraph? The hash table knows that. So it's quite interesting for me, for you to know that. So yes, guys, I hope you find this thing quite insightful. Hash tables are actually getting me excited when I talk about it. Just talking about understanding the different types of how data gets stored, data structures, meant to say, variables, data tables, list, arrays, and hash table. I think doing so will actually help our analysis to go 10 times better, and it will also help us to become efficient in a way or two, because you would know that, oh, I have hashed my data, I must allow for decoding time. It might take longer, or I'm using variables instead of a direct query every time. It might actually be faster to get the results. So you would tell your clients or your exco, your menco, how long it will take with your analysis. Thank you for tuning in once again on this episode number 11. We'll meet again in episode number 12, which is coming up just now.